A war stops feeling foreign the moment it rewrites the price of your mailbox. When package shipping needs an 8% jump across Priority Mail Express, Priority Mail, USPS, Ground Advantage, and Parcel Select, the battlefield is no longer just somewhere far away. It has already crossed the distance between a strike zone and your front door. Then the same war starts speaking through different bills at once. United Airlines and JetBlue raised baggage fees. Amazon added a 3.5% fuel surcharge on sellers, and one moving business running 2,000 trucks has already watched fuel swell from a normal 3-5% of revenue to 6-10% since the war began. That is not random inflation. That is one conflict spreading under 3 different names. And then the delivery system dropped the polite language completely and started pricing the war by the pound. UPS moved to a 64 cents per pound surge fee on shipments tied to 15 Middle East countries, while FedEx piled on its own demand surcharges. That is what it looks like when commerce stops absorbing the shock and starts forwarding it straight to the customer. If you want coverage that follows the bill after the blast, subscribe now and drop one word in the comments: flights, groceries, or parcels, because the first place you feel this squeeze tells you exactly how far the spread has already gone. Under all of this sits the number poisoning everything else. Brent crude briefly hit $119 a barrel. That is not just a market number for traders to stare at. That is pressure moving into jet fuel, diesel, fertilizer, packaging, freight contracts, and every company now deciding how much of this war bill it can dump onto ordinary people before they finally notice. So the real question is no longer whether the Iran war can raise prices. It already has. The real question is whether flights, groceries, and parcel fees are just the first visible cracks in a much larger repricing of normal life. That is where the official story starts to fall apart. Officially, this can still be framed as manageable, temporary, and mostly about energy. But if the same war is already hitting your ticket, your cart, and your delivery notice, then this is not just an oil story anymore. It is a spread story. That is why the comforting line that America does not need Middle East oil is politically useful and economically hollow. Americans still pay what the global market pays, which means a tighter war corridor overseas still becomes a higher domestic cost here. Energy independence does not buy price immunity when the world is still pricing fear into the same barrel. And that is the first deception built into the story. People hear we produce our own energy and imagine insulation. Markets hear disruption and price risk anyway. The result is that voters get reassurance, while carriers, retailers, airlines, and farms quietly get a more expensive operating environment. The spread also hides itself by looking boring. A surcharge looks technical. A baggage fee looks annoying. A grocery increase looks accidental. A postal filing looks administrative. Stack those things together and a different picture appears. The war is already moving through civilian systems that were supposed to feel invisible. The reason the shock is spreading this fast is brutally simple. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, which normally carries around 20% of global oil consumption, has been reduced to a trickle in what is being described as the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. That is not a background condition. That is the artery tightening. Once that artery tightens, everything downstream starts behaving differently. Oil gets riskier. Refined fuels get tighter. Insurance gets more expensive. Rerouting becomes normal. The cost of movement rises before the average person has even heard the phrase supply disruption enough times to take it seriously. That is why the first major civilian fracture appears in freight. Air cargo rates on some routes have already jumped by as much as 70% since the war began. Because the conflict is limiting flights, blocking some ocean shipments, and driving up jet fuel at the same time. Once urgency gets expensive, the whole economy starts paying more just to stay functional. And that is how spread really works. One route gets harder, so business jumps to another. That other route gets crowded, costly, and strained. Then the cost of the workaround becomes the next source of inflation. The shock does not move in a straight line. It ricochets. The network is already thinner than most people understand. Airlines are operating at only 40-60% of pre-crisis capacity across affected parts of the region, which means every new airspace scare lands on a system already running with less slack, less flexibility, and less ability to shield the customer from the next jump in cost. This is why flights come first in the title. Not because airfare is the deepest pain, because airfare is the fastest confession. Aviation tells the truth earlier than politics does, because a plane cannot fly on reassurance. It flies on fuel, time, route access, and margins. And that confession is already on the way. Airlines in Asia and Europe have raised fares, added fuel surcharges, or adjusted schedules, as the conflict drove jet fuel sharply higher and disrupted key routes. So even passengers who are never going anywhere near the war zone are already paying for skies that got more dangerous somewhere else. Flights are the fast signal. They tell the audience that the system is under pressure right now, before the slower categories fully catch up. The ticket price moves first because aviation updates quickly. The rest of the pain follows on a delay, and that delay is exactly what makes the next phase more dangerous. Because once flights are telling the truth, groceries are usually already on the way. Food does not move as fast as airfare, but it absorbs the same stress through trucking, refrigeration, fertilizer, and delivery timing. It just reaches the consumer more quietly. The first grocery pain shows up where time matters most. Produce, meat, and dairy are among the first aisles likely to feel higher fuel costs because they are perishable, time-sensitive, and expensive to keep waiting. The less shelf-stable the food, the faster war pressure moves from the fuel market into the cart. That is what makes grocery inflation feel sneaky. It rarely arrives as one dramatic moment. It arrives as a few higher staples, then a few more, then a receipt that feels wrong, then the quiet realization that people are changing what they buy without saying it out loud. The global food system has already started moving in the wrong direction. The food price index rose 2.4% in March, and that is the kind of number people underestimate, because it still sounds manageable. But the same morning made clear that if this conflict stretches beyond roughly 40 days under high input costs, farmers start choosing between using fewer inputs, planting less, or switching crops. That is where a price squeeze turns into a supply problem. So groceries are not the side plot of this war. They are the delayed blast wave. Gas hits first because you see it instantly. Food hits later because it has to move through contracts, planting decisions, wholesalers, trucking, and retailers deciding exactly when to pass through the pain. And this is where the story turns from expensive to genuinely dangerous. Crude rose nearly 40% between February and March, and nitrogen-based fertilizers rose nearly 50% in March. That means the war is not only making food harder to move, it is making food more expensive to grow before it is even harvested. Gasoline punishes the weak. Fertilizer punishes the season. A bad fill-up hurts your budget. Now, a fertilizer shock changes what farmers plant, how much they can afford to feed the soil, and what the next round of yields looks like months from now. That is why the grocery threat is slower but deeper. And now you can see the structure of the title clearly. Flights are the fast signal. Groceries are the slow fuse. Parcel fees are the proof that even convenience has stopped being protected. This is one spread pattern, moving at 3 different speeds, not 3 separate stories. One of the clearest admissions in the entire story came from global shipping itself. These increases will pass to customers and then pass to consumers. That is the sentence underneath everything else here. The cost is not being swallowed somewhere in the middle of the supply chain. It is being handed forward until it reaches the person with the least power to negotiate. This is the hidden violence of the whole thing. Governments frame the war strategically. Companies frame the new charges operationally. But households experience the result as a pass-through. They do not see a doctrine. They see a higher bill and a smaller margin for error. And there is no clean escape route left inside the transport system. Jet fuel, bunker fuel, and even petrol supplies are tightening at the same time. Driving rate increases across air, ocean, and road logistics together. When all 3 layers harden at once, every workaround becomes more expensive than the last one. That is when parcel fees stop being a side annoyance and become a strategic signal. Parcels sit at the end of the chain, where all the earlier pressure finally becomes visible to normal people. You do not need to understand freight indexes or Gulf choke points to understand that delivery suddenly costs more than it did last month. That is why the phrase volatility tax matters so much. A fuel surcharge is the system putting a retail price on instability and charging it on every shipment, while small businesses are left deciding whether to absorb it, pass it through, or lose the customer. For the man trying to fuel 2,000 trucks, this is not abstract macroeconomics, it is operational survival. And that is the human anchor of the whole story. Not a finance minister, not a general, A business owner staring at trucks, invoices, and customers who are just as squeezed as he is. That is what this war looks like once it reaches civilian life. 1,000 forced decisions pushed downward onto people who had no say in starting any of it. This is also why the language of temporary adjustments should make you suspicious. Yes, some exact fees may be trimmed later. Some surcharges may be renamed. Some spikes may cool. But once the system learns it can attach a higher cost to movement and customers do not fully walk away, the old price rarely returns in its old shape. If the war cools quickly, some of the sharper spikes can ease. Oil can retreat from the top. A few airfare surges can soften. Some emergency charges can come down. But the political risk premium on this corridor does not vanish overnight. And neither does the commercial memory of what just happened. If the war drags on, the spread gets uglier and more intimate. Flights become the first warning. Groceries become the deeper squeeze. And parcel fees become the constant reminder that even normal convenience now carries Middle East risks baked into its price. In that version, the shock does not just keep spreading. It starts settling in. So the central question has an answer now. Yes, the Iran war has already begun changing the price of ordinary life in ways that do not simply disappear when the shooting slows. If the conflict ends sooner, the pain lingers. If it lasts longer, the pain compounds. Either way, the old price of normal has already been hit. And that is the hardest truth buried inside this headline. The most important expansion of this war may not be territorial at all. It may be the moment it stopped looking like foreign policy and started behaving like an operating cost inside your travel, your groceries, your deliveries, and your daily choices. Stay close. We follow the pressure long after the explosion, because that is where the real story usually gets more dangerous.